A white passenger threatened a black boy, but minutes later, his father, an Army commander, stepped in, and the situation took an unexpected turn. A white passenger pulled a knife on a black boy mid-flight, believing fear would silence him. He didn't realize the child's father was an Army commander already rushing down the jet bridge. The moment that blade flashed, destiny shifted. Subscribe if you believe arrogance always collapses when true power arrives. The first time Jarek Mondell noticed the man, he had just looked up from his sketchbook. The stranger was pacing erratically near the vending machines, jaw tight, eyes flicking around as if tracking shadows no one else could see. The crowd in the Brimhold Crest Transit Terminal moved in lazy waves, families hauling luggage, college students scrolling through phones, businessmen murmuring into earpieces, but this man was a rupture in the calm. His movements didn't match the rhythm of travel. They were sharp, nervous, deliberate. Jarek's pencil hovered above the page. His drawing, a rough outline of the terminal's tall arched ceiling, remained incomplete. The air felt thicker now, as if the building had taken a breath and held it. The boy was only 13, but he had learned to notice when something wasn't right. His father, Commander Rylan Mondell, always said, "Your instincts are your first defense. Listen to them even if no one else does." Jarek did. The man was pale, lanky, and dressed in a long, dark coat despite the mild weather. He kept one hand buried inside the coat, holding something that made the fabric twitch slightly with each movement. Jarek's gaze dropped to the man's shoes, scuffed, worn at the heels, and then rose again to his face. The man noticed. He stopped walking, and stared. It wasn't the kind of stare that people gave when recognizing someone or glancing out of curiosity. This was a stare sharpened by purpose. Jarek looked away quickly and shifted on the bench near Gate 4S, glancing at the arrival screen. His father's flight had landed, but the deboarding process always took time. He tapped a message to his dad, "I'm near 4S. You landing now?" and hit send. The phone vibrated once, then showed a red warning. Message not delivered. Aircraft mode, Jarek realized. His father's phone was likely still off. He pocketed the device, trying not to show concern, but the man hadn't moved. Now he was walking slowly toward him. Jarek could hear the squeak of the man's shoes with every step. The terminal's lighting, usually soft and gold, flickered once as if unsettled. Jarek's eyes darted to the security booth across the concourse. Two guards were arguing over a flickering scanner alarm, completely unaware of anything else. The man, Brimhold, though Jarek didn't know his name yet, passed by him once, paused at a trash bin, and then doubled back. His path seemed random to most, but to Jarek, it felt like a tightening spiral. He clutched his backpack a little closer, pretending to draw again, though the lines on the paper were now aimless strokes. From the corner of his eye, he saw the man pace by again, his coat shifting unnaturally at the waist, hand still inside. "Hey!" a voice rasped suddenly. Jarek froze. The man stood directly in front of him now, forcing a crooked smile. "You waiting for someone?" Jarek nodded, his throat dry. "Yeah, my dad." "Military?" the man asked too quickly. His eyes twitched. "How'd you?" Jarek blinked. "Your posture," the man said, waving vaguely. "You sit like someone who's been trained." His tone was thin, insincere. Then came a pause too long to be casual. "That's good. Means you won't panic." Jarek didn't respond. His muscles coiled. Behind them, the hum of the terminal remained unchanged. Boarding calls, rolling luggage wheels, faint chatter. The rest of the world moved like nothing was wrong. Dramatic irony hung in the air. Everyone else saw just a boy and a traveler talking. Only Jarek and the reader sensed the truth building just beneath the surface. The man finally moved away again, pacing toward the information kiosk. But Jarek noticed something he hadn't seen before. When the man turned, a thin, metallic glint peeked out from beneath his sleeve. Not a reflection, not a button. A blade. Jarek's mouth went dry. He stood slowly, pulling his backpack over one shoulder. If he could make it to the main kiosk, he'd be surrounded by more people. But as soon as he stepped forward, the man reappeared in his path, smile wider, more forced. "Where are you headed?" the man asked again, this time standing too close. Jarek tried stepping around him. The man mirrored the movement. Jarek stopped. His heart pounded so loudly he was afraid it might give him away. "Just trying to stretch my legs." "Smart," the man said, nodding too much. "Places like this, you gotta stay alert. Never know who's watching." Jarek said nothing. The man leaned slightly closer, his eyes narrowed. "You remind me of someone I used to know." Jarek shifted his stance, preparing to move again. His father's voice echoed in his head. "If you feel it's wrong, trust it before it proves itself right." The man didn't let him pass. Behind them, the scanner alarm finally shut off and the two security guards returned to their station, laughing. They hadn't seen a thing. "I think I'll go wait somewhere else," Jarek said carefully. But the man's hand emerged from his coat, just briefly, and Jarek saw the outline of what he feared. A folding knife, thin and black-handled. The hand disappeared again as quickly as it had shown itself, but the message was clear. "Hey," the man said, softer this time. "You seem like a smart kid. Just stay calm, and nothing has to go wrong." Jarek's legs felt like stone, but he didn't freeze. Not yet. The evening light filtering through the high windows looked calm, even beautiful. Travelers passed, announcements rolled on, families laughed, and yet beneath it all, something had shifted. The calm was no longer peace. It was the silence before the break. Something in the air felt like it was about to break. Jarek's pencil paused mid-line. He had been trying to finish the outline of a vintage airship in his sketchbook, but something in the rhythm of the terminal disrupted his concentration. Not the usual noise, he'd grown used to that, but something less obvious. A presence. Across the hall, the tall man with pale skin and restless eyes, Rylan Mondell, continued circling like a moth chasing a flickering light. He walked with a forced rhythm, stopping too often, checking the same digital schedules repeatedly as if he didn't trust what they said. But every few moments his eyes darted to Jarek. Not casually, not in passing. Locked, like he was verifying something, some feature, some posture, some target. Jarek looked down, pretending to return to his drawing, but the lines wavered with his growing unease. He wasn't prone to panic. His father had taught him the difference between fear and awareness. Right now, his awareness was loud. The stranger moved again. Rylan approached a vending machine just a few feet from where Jarek sat, tapping its buttons too quickly, like his hands had a mind of their own. The machine beeped twice, failing to dispense anything, and Rylan hissed under his breath, slapping the side with the back of his hand. But it wasn't frustration over snacks. It was deeper, as though the wait itself was unbearable, a delay interrupting something he had rehearsed. Jarek glanced across the terminal toward the ticket booth. A young man in uniform, Malden Rear, leaned against the counter and noticed Rylan's agitation. His brows furrowed. For a moment, Malden stepped forward but then stopped and shook his head as if brushing off his own concern. "Probably just another anxious traveler," he mumbled, returning to his screen. Jarek tightened his grip on his pencil. He felt that familiar sting of dramatic irony, the world around him operating in motion, blind to what he could see in sharp clarity. Rylan wasn't lost or late. He was waiting. Suddenly, the overhead lights flickered once, briefly dimming before resetting to full brightness. A soft, electrical hum vibrated through the terminal as the power stabilizer kicked in. Most people ignored it. Rylan didn't. He froze, eyes widening, like the flicker was a countdown, like something had just begun. He didn't even try to hide the shift in his posture. His shoulders stiffened. His hand curled slightly tighter into his coat. That was enough for Jarek. He stood up quietly, sliding his sketchbook into his backpack with practiced calm. He didn't look at Rylan, but he felt the man's gaze follow him. Jarek angled himself toward the central kiosk where more travelers were gathering. A strategy. People, noise, security cameras, safety. But before he could take 2 steps, Varen moved. He stepped directly into Jarek's path with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. It was stiff, mechanical, forced. "Going somewhere, kid?" His voice was casual, too casual, words lined with something too rehearsed. Jarek stopped cold. "I was just heading over to grab a bottle of water," he said, motioning subtly with his thumb, trying not to show how fast his heart was beating. "Ah," Varen said, voice flat. "Stay hydrated. That's smart." He didn't move. Jarek tried stepping to the right. Varen matched him. Left. The same. It was like trying to sidestep a mirror that wasn't made of glass but of something colder, more dangerous. The boy's mind screamed for logic. Maybe this man thought he was someone else? Maybe he was confused? But Jarek's instincts whispered otherwise. He remembered his father's words repeated on long walks, on early morning training drills, on days when Rylan Mondell prepared him for the unexpected. Your instincts speak before danger does. Listen to them. Don't argue. Don't delay. Jarek lifted his eyes to meet Varen's. The stranger was watching him too closely now. His smile remained frozen, but his eyes had shifted, sharp, calculating. Then Varen tilted slightly, adjusting his coat, and for a split second, something metallic glinted from under the cuff. Thin, reflective, too long to be a pen, a blade. Jarek felt it then, not fear, but confirmation. The world didn't feel heavy with imagination anymore. It felt precise, real. Varen's voice came again, quieter now. "You look like you've been here a while, waiting for someone." Jarek offered a shrug. "Just passing time." "Me too," Varen said, his smile fading ever so slightly. "Funny how long time can stretch when you're waiting for the right moment." Jarek's pulse climbed. He looked around. No one was watching. Malden was back behind the counter, distracted. The security guards were at the far end of the terminal dealing with a delayed baggage alert. The cluster of passengers near the kiosk were laughing at something on someone's phone. No one saw the chessboard forming between a 13-year-old and a man with something dangerous tucked inside his sleeve. Jarek took a step back. Varen didn't follow immediately this time. Instead, he tilted his head, as though measuring something unseen. "You remind me of someone," he murmured. Jarek said nothing. He didn't care who the man thought he was. What mattered was the line between suspicion and certainty had now thinned into a single breath. A moment, a thread, and it was fraying. Jarek's fingers clenched his backpack strap, his mind racing, heart pounding. He didn't know what this man wanted, but he knew one thing for sure. He wasn't just standing in front of a strange man anymore. He was standing on the edge of something darker, something intentional. And then came the thought that tied it all together. Not fear, not confusion, but clarity. Jarek felt the moment slipping toward something irreversible. Varen's hand shot out and gripped Jarek's wrist with a strength that stunned the boy. The movement was sudden, deliberate, no longer cloaked in awkward pacing or feigned small talk. His fingers clamped like metal around Jarek's forearm, the skin beneath aching almost instantly from the force. Jarek's sketchbook slipped from under his elbow and hit the terminal floor with a muted thud, but no one nearby turned to look. The noise was too small, too ordinary in the grand churn of the crowd. Jarek's first instinct was to pull back, but the pressure on his wrist tightened, the man's grip shifting to control rather than restraint. Varen leaned in closer, his breath hot and uneven against Jarek's cheek. "Tell me," he said softly with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "do you usually wait alone?" The question sounded casual, but something in the way Varen's jaw tensed, how his pupils never stopped flicking between Jarek and the edges of the terminal, made the boy's chest tighten. His heart thumped louder than the announcements over the intercom. I'm just waiting for my dad," Jarek said carefully, trying to keep his voice even, to not sound like prey. He tried stepping back again, subtly shifting his weight, but Varen moved with him, shadowing him like a reflection distorted by tension. Across the lobby, behind the main desk, Malden Rear, the young ticket clerk, caught the interaction in his peripheral vision. He squinted. Varen loomed over the boy, awkwardly, much too close, but Malden hesitated. Maybe the man was just a worried parent. Maybe he was being protective. A second later, the arrival of a tour group broke Malden's line of sight and pulled him back into his console. Jarek's hands curled into light fists as he took in every detail: the discoloration under Varen's eyes, the twitch in his cheek, the way he kept glancing toward the maintenance hallway. It wasn't curiosity. It was calculation. The kind of gaze that didn't just see you, it measured what you could survive. Then Varen whispered something. Words Jarek barely caught over the sound of nearby foot traffic. Some corners don't echo, boy. That's where things stay. Silent. No witnesses. Jarek's mouth went dry. He tried again to free himself, his muscles tensing in one fluid motion, but Varen's other hand emerged from his coat, trembling slightly, holding something long and metallic. A knife. The blade was thin and sharp, the kind meant for precision, not clumsy violence. It caught the overhead lighting in a cold shimmer as Varen shifted slightly to conceal it between their bodies. His coat fell just right to hide the weapon from others. But Jarek saw it clearly. Too clearly. The boy froze. His legs wanted to move, to bolt, but his instincts now screamed not to act yet. His thoughts raced back to all the things his father had told him growing up. You don't beat danger by running blind. You beat it by thinking faster than it moves. Jarek held his breath as his gaze dropped again to the knife. Varen didn't blink, didn't shift. He kept his eyes fixed on Jarek like a hawk pinning a mouse before the strike. The tension in the man's face didn't look like anger. It looked like desperation soaked in something colder. A plan. I don't want to hurt you, Varen whispered, voice strained, but I will if you make this difficult. His voice cracked as he said it, and for the first time, Jarek caught something beneath the surface. Fear? Paranoia? The knife didn't tremble from rage. It trembled from a storm Varen was barely holding inside himself. Still, that didn't make him any less dangerous. Jarek's eyes darted quickly around. No one was looking. The travelers streamed past with bags, eyes glued to screens or companions, laughing, grumbling, living moments that did not include him. It felt unreal, how the world could stay so normal when something so wrong was happening just feet from them. A child arguing with a parent, a man waiting for a late friend. That's what it must have looked like. But no one saw the knife. No one saw the grip tightening just enough to leave a mark. Jarek knew then he couldn't rely on luck or help. Not yet. He tried speaking, stalling. You've got the wrong person, he said, carefully shaping each word. I don't know you. Varen's smile widened just enough to reveal the edge of something broken. Oh, I know that. But knowing someone isn't always the point. Being seen, that's what matters. You were seen. Jarek didn't understand what he meant, but the way he said you were seen made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. Like it wasn't about Jarek at all, but something bigger, something the man was trapped in. As he shifted again, his backpack slipped from his shoulder. The quiet thump as it landed went completely unnoticed by the terminal around them, but Varen's eyes never flinched. The blade didn't move. Jarek didn't dare reach for the bag. Across the terminal, Malden Rear finally glanced back again, but the crowd had thickened, and his sightline was blocked. The moment to intervene passed like a train through fog, mist and gone. Jarek's breath slowed, not by choice but because everything inside him had gone quiet. Like the body bracing for an impact, the mind was still trying to stop. The knife's reflection cut through every remaining doubt. Varen shoved the cold blade closer to Jarek's side as he forced the boy toward the narrow maintenance hallway, his movements jerky and unstable. The shift from the open terminal into the dim corridor happened so quickly that Jarek barely had time to process it. One moment he was surrounded by hundreds of people, and the next he was being herded into a shadowed passage where the sounds of rolling luggage and distant chatter faded behind thick concrete walls. His instincts roared to break free, yet he held himself still, knowing any sudden motion could end in disaster. Jarek kept his breaths shallow, his eyes scanning the tight surroundings while his mind raced through every lesson his father had drilled into him. Control your fear. Observe everything. Act when the moment opens. Varen's grip trembled violently, the man's fingers tightening and loosening in uneven pulses. Jarek felt each shift through the fabric of his jacket, and the unpredictable rhythm frightened him more than a steady, confident hold ever could. "Move," Varen muttered, his voice cracked with tension. The false calm in his tone carried more danger than an outright shout. His steps were stiff, almost dragging, as though he were being pushed forward by some inner force he barely understood. As they neared the hallway entrance, Jarek's gaze caught a small utility switch disguised as a cleaning request button on the wall. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Every environment has something you can use." Jarek forced himself to breathe slower, masking his rising panic. When Varen looked briefly over his shoulder to ensure no one was watching, Jarek used that split second. He stretched his fingers just enough to brush the switch. A faint flash of light signaled activation, but there was no blaring alarm, no shout from nearby staff. The button only alerted maintenance quietly. Jarek hoped desperately someone would see the alert. He didn't dare look back to confirm. Any motion might expose what he'd done. The hallway swallowed them in a dim hush, the fluorescent lights above flickering with an uneven hum. Shadows pooled in the corners, amplifying the sense of isolation. Varen pressed the blade closer, so near that Jarek felt the cool metal skim the fabric of his shirt. "Not a sound," Varen whispered, his voice shaking. "If you speak, things end quickly." His breath smelled faintly of stale air and something metallic, and his eyes flickered with a frantic sharpness that made Jarek's skin tighten. Jarek steadied himself, trying to calm the rapid pounding in his chest. He knew panicking would only cloud his judgment. He watched Varen carefully, not just the weapon, but the man's face, his quivering jaw, the twitch in his cheek, the way his gaze darted around as though expecting shadows to leap out at him. Varen muttered under his breath, fragments of words that blended together into unsettling phrases. "They hear everything. No one listens. They follow me." His sentences were fractured, pieces of a story that made no sense but carried a weight of obsession. A faint blinking light from the corner panel caught Varen's attention for a moment, but he didn't understand its meaning. Jarek did. It was the maintenance alert he'd triggered. Someone, anyone, might be heading their way. Dramatic irony settled heavily. Jarek felt utterly alone, believing no one knew he had been taken, unaware that a single janitor had already noticed the panel's change. At that same moment, footsteps echoed down the distant corridor, steady, measured, unaware. A janitor named Bren Lorick had seen the blinking signal and begun walking toward the hallway, pushing his cart slowly, expecting a loose wire or faulty bulb. Jarek didn't know this, but the reader could feel the weight of it. Help was close, yet completely unaware of the danger it was stepping toward. Varen paced in front of Jarek, his steps uneven, his grip jittering like an electrical current running through his arm. Every swing of the blade brought it dangerously close to Jarek's ribs. The boy swallowed hard, forcing himself not to recoil. He needed to focus, to find even the smallest opening. "They think they can corner me," Varen muttered, shaking his head. "But I see what they don't. I see the signs. I see who's watching." His voice cracked again, drifting between anger and fear, revealing a mind that seemed trapped in its own twisting maze. Jarek finally dared to speak. "You don't have to do this," he said softly, keeping his tone steady. "We can talk. Just let me—" "Quiet!" Varen snapped, whipping the blade up in warning. His face tightened, a mixture of panic and determination. The outburst was so sudden that Jarek flinched involuntarily, heart leaping into his throat. He took a slow step back, careful not to provoke another reaction. His thoughts raced through everything he knew: pressure points, escape angles, timing. But every option seemed too risky with the knife so close. He needed Varen to lose focus, even for a single second. The corridor lights flickered again, casting shifting shadows across the walls. Varen's eyes darted toward them, interpreting the flickers as signals meant for him, his breathing growing more erratic. "They're here," he whispered. "They always send messages before they act." Jarek watched him closely, realizing the man wasn't just unstable. He was terrified of something only he could see. Every detail in the hallway sharpened in Jarek's mind: the faint hum of the bulbs, the cold air from the overhead vent, the subtle vibration in the floor from distant foot traffic. He listened for any clue that someone else might be approaching. He needed time. He needed the right moment. But the moment hadn't arrived yet. Varen stepped closer, blade trembling inches from Jarek's side, and hissed, "You move wrong once, and everything ends." Jarek held still, every muscle waiting, every instinct wired to react. He didn't know how long the situation could hold, but he knew one truth: he needed a chance. Any chance. Escape now depended on seconds that had not yet arrived. Varen's breathing broke into uneven gasps the moment he shoved Jarek deeper into the hallway, the dim lights trembling above them as if even the bulbs feared what might happen next. The narrow space pressed in from both sides, the air thick with dust and the sharp metallic scent of old pipes. Varen paced in a short, jagged line, the knife flicking erratically in his trembling hand. Every few steps he muttered under his breath, words fractured by panic. "They take everything. They always take everything. Not this time." His voice cracked as though he argued with shadows instead of a trembling boy cornered against the wall. Jarek stood with his back nearly touching the cold metal pipe behind him. He watched Varen's hand with narrow focus, trying to judge when the man's attention drifted. His father's voice echoed in his mind, steady and firm. "Stay aware. Don't freeze. Control what you can." The knife glinted each time Varen's wrist jerked, and Jarek felt his pulse thrum like a trapped drumbeat. He shifted a single step, slow enough to avoid sudden attention, hoping to get closer to the pipe, anything he could use to defend himself if the moment came. Outside the hallway, Bren Lorik moved cautiously toward the blinking maintenance signal. His heavy boots dragged along the tile as he wiped grease from his hands, squinting at the wall panel in confusion. Dramatic irony closed around the scene like a tightening coil. Help had arrived, yet Bren had no idea how close danger truly stood. He took another hesitant step, head tilted as he listened for a sound. Inside, Jarek tried shifting again, but Varen caught the small movement instantly. With a sudden burst of strength, the man lunged forward and grabbed Jarek's shoulder. His grip was hot, clammy, and unsteady, but his desperation gave him a disturbing force. The boy recoiled at the sudden closeness, the knife hovering inches from his throat. Varen's eyes widened, pupils uneven, flicking back and forth as though he were fighting thoughts no one else could hear. "Stay still," Varen hissed, his voice thin and cracking. "Don't move unless you want this to end quickly." The blade trembled so close that Jarek could feel the cold air around it. He lifted his hand slightly, showing surrender, but his mind raced, looking for openings, timing, anything. Suddenly, a distant announcement echoed down the corridor, the speaker crackling before a calm voice filled the hallway. "Arrival confirmed for inbound craft, Commander Rylan Mondell." The words rolled through the narrow space like an invisible shockwave. Varen stiffened instantly, jerking his head toward the ceiling as though the announcement were aimed solely at him. His expression twisted, anger flaring without explanation. "Warnings," he muttered sharply. "They send warnings." His knuckles tightened around the knife, the blade trembling dangerously close to Jarek's skin. Jarek's heartbeat surged. The hallway seemed to shrink, shadows stretching long against the walls. He could almost imagine his father stepping off the aircraft at that very moment, unaware that his son stood only corridors away with a knife nearly pressed to his throat. The thought brought fear and hope, but hope alone wouldn't save him now. He needed to stall, to stay alive long enough for someone to find him. "Please, I'm not who you think I am," Jarek whispered, trying to steady his voice. The hallway swallowed his words, but Varen's breathing hitched. The boy's mind raced through every tactic his father had taught him: slow speech, calm tone, stay alert. He forced himself to meet Varen's eyes, even as his stomach twisted. "I'm just waiting for my father. I don't know anything about what you're talking about." Varen's face twitched. For a moment, confusion dulled the edge of his rage, but then his expression hardened again, as if an unseen voice whispered instructions only he could hear. He tightened his grip on Jarek's shoulder, pushing him back another step. The wall pipe pressed into Jarek's spine, grounding him even as dread pressed harder. Outside, Bren took another step toward the hallway entrance, calling softly, "Hello? Someone activate this?" His voice echoed faintly, barely reaching beyond the corner. Jarek heard it. He dared not react visibly, but inside, hope sparked again. Bren was close. Close enough to see. Close enough to shout for real help, but also close enough to die if Varen panicked. Jarek swallowed hard. He needed to keep Varen's attention on him, not on the world outside the hallway. "Why me?" he asked, voice trembling but purposeful. "Why are you doing this?" Varen stopped pacing. His head twitched once, twice, and then he stared at Jarek with a strange mixture of fury and despair. "Because they think I won't fight back," he whispered, his voice cracking sharply. "But I will. I have to." The instability in his voice chilled Jarek deeper than the knife ever could. He glanced sideways only for a fraction of a second toward the pipe. If Varen lunged again, maybe, just maybe, he could turn, protect himself, block the blow. Another overhead announcement boomed through the terminal, causing Varen to flinch violently. The sudden movement made the knife dip dangerously close to Jarek's chest before snapping back up. The man's breathing sped into ragged bursts, each one pulling him deeper into volatile confusion. The hallway felt as if it were folding in on itself. Every sound echoed too loudly. Every movement felt too sharp. Jarek's chest rose and fell in tight, fast breaths as he realized the moment was spiraling out of control. If Bren or anyone else turned the corner now, Varen might strike without thinking. Jarek forced himself to stay still, to keep thinking, to hold on to his father's lessons one thought at a time. The stakes were no longer growing. They had arrived. He understood it now. This was the dividing line between survival and tragedy, between escape and the unthinkable. Jarek understood this was the moment everything could turn deadly. "Hey, is someone back here?" Bren Lorik's voice rang down the narrow maintenance hallway, bouncing off the cold concrete walls and overhead pipes. His footsteps echoed behind it, slow but cautious. The dim corridor smelled faintly of bleach and dust, and a single flickering bulb overhead cast twitching shadows on the tiled floor. He had followed the blinking alert from the cleaning request panel, nothing more than a maintenance ping, likely a faulty light again. But something in his gut told him this wasn't routine. Ahead, Varen Holdex jerked his head toward the sound, eyes flaring wide like a startled animal. His grip on Jarek's arm tightened suddenly, fingers digging into the boy's sleeve with desperate force. Jarek inhaled sharply but didn't speak. That tiny shift in attention was all he needed. He adjusted his stance slightly, pivoting his foot just enough to shift his weight. Not a full escape, but a preparation. A tiny angle. An opening. One he might need any second. Bren stepped further in, a flashlight now in his hand, the beam cutting through the dim air. "Anyone need assistance?" he asked again, voice uncertain now. His eyes swept left, then right, and then he saw them. He froze. A teenage boy. A man holding a knife. The boy's body stiff, jaw clenched. The man's shoulders hunched, blade raised just enough to be seen clearly in the flashlight's arc. For a second, the air collapsed into silence. "What?" Bren began, but Varen roared before he could finish. "Get out!" the man snarled, the knife flashing through the air like a warning. "This doesn't concern you." Bren's mouth opened, but no words came. The flashlight dipped slightly in his hand. He was just a janitor, not a guard, not trained for this, not prepared to see a blade drawn on a boy. His boots shuffled backward on instinct, yet he didn't fully retreat. Jarek's eyes locked on Bren's. In that split second, the boy gave the smallest shake of his head, barely perceptible, but deliberate. A warning. Don't charge in. Don't trigger panic. Bren understood. He nodded back once, shallowly, and slowly began stepping out of Varen's direct line of sight, just enough to keep him in peripheral vision. Varen's breathing became louder, shallow, unsteady. He muttered something under his breath, fragments of speech that didn't form real sentences. His free hand twitched. Jarek could feel the tension in the man's body, like a cable stretched too tight and ready to snap. The boy didn't dare flinch. "Move," Varen said low and sharp, dragging Jarek deeper into the corridor. They passed exposed pipes and storage cabinets, heading toward a rusted metal door marked Service Access, Authorized Only. It was rarely used and led behind the supply rooms, places where cameras didn't reach and where few people ever walked. Jarek's eyes darted to the door, and dread unfurled in his chest. If Varen managed to lock them inside there, no one would find them in time. That door was more than metal. It was a wall between possibility and disappearance. Bren hovered just at the edge of the hallway, heart pounding. He raised his earpiece radio with shaking fingers and whispered, "This is maintenance. Code red in corridor C12. We have an armed suspect with a child. Repeat, armed suspect. Send security now." He tried to stay quiet, but urgency leaked into his voice. Back inside, Jarek felt the shift. Varen's hand trembled as it reached for the door handle. The blade pressed awkwardly against the boy's jacket as the man fumbled with the latch. "Open, open, open," Varen hissed, kicking lightly at the bottom of the door when the lock resisted. Behind them, the hallway remained quiet, but that silence was deceptive. Jarek had caught the low crackle of Bren's earpiece just before being pulled forward. Someone knew. Help was coming. But how soon? "You think I'm bluffing?" Varen muttered, staring down at Jarek as if expecting an answer. The boy didn't give him one. He didn't need to. The calm he projected wasn't surrender. It was control. A thin line of it, barely holding against the weight of panic. Jarek's thoughts spun, but one truth anchored him. This man didn't fully know what he was doing. He was scared, too. The trembling, the indecision, the muttering, it all screamed of someone unraveling. And unraveling people made mistakes. He just needed to be ready when that mistake came. Outside the hallway, Bren was now crouched low behind a corner wall. The janitor's breathing was fast, adrenaline rushing through his limbs. He could hear approaching footsteps, security, maybe more, but he kept his voice low as he whispered updates into the earpiece, relaying everything he could see, everything he heard. This wasn't just an interruption anymore. It was a situation spiraling fast. In the dim hallway, Jarek glanced around. Pipes, wires, a mop handle leaning against a wall, a half-open cabinet of light bulbs and trash bags. No weapons, no safe exit. Only the narrowing space between himself and the closing door. He could hear Varen mumbling again. "They always watch. They always wait. You're just like the rest of them. You think you can see through it, but you can't." Jarek stayed silent. Every breath, every glance, every decision now mattered. Outside, Bren leaned against the wall and closed his eyes just long enough to whisper, "Please hurry," into the earpiece. Inside, the weight of the moment settled on Jarek's chest like stone. He wasn't just trying to survive now. He was trying to outthink someone unraveling by the second. And somewhere deep inside, He sensed it. A break in pattern was coming. A gap. A moment. He just had to be ready when it came. The hallway now felt like a funnel guiding everything toward a dangerous point. Bren Lorick's voice buzzed low through the staff radio, shaky but urgent. Maintenance Code 4-19 activated in Hallway B. Possible situation. He tried to keep his tone even, but his hands betrayed him, trembling as he adjusted his headset. Down the corridor, 2 uniformed security officers, Officers Rendell and Kerr, began moving toward the blinking signal on their portable console screens, unaware that they were seconds from stepping into a crisis unlike anything they'd ever trained for. Inside the hallway, the air had thickened with desperation. Baron Holdex yanked again at the rusted service door, grunting in frustration as the lock clanked but didn't release. "Why won't this open? Why now?" he hissed under his breath, sweat glistening on his brow. The more it resisted, the more he turned his fury toward the boy. "This is your fault," he growled at Jarek, shoving him backward with one hand while the other kept the blade pressed near his side. "Every time I try to disappear, people like you just show up, staring, asking questions." Jarek's back hit the wall hard, but he held back a cry. He didn't want to give Varen any sense of victory. Every nerve in his body screamed for him to run, to scream, to lash out. But one part of him, the part his father had shaped through years of calm discipline, told him to wait, to watch. Varen's hand shook as he rattled the door again. The lock still jammed. His breathing became erratic, fast, shallow bursts like a man drowning in air. Jarek spotted it then. A slight drop in the blade's position, just a few inches lower than before. It was a weakness, and it was growing. Outside the hallway entrance, Bren's footsteps echoed as he led the officers closer. "It's through here," he whispered, careful not to raise his voice. "I think a kid's involved." His stomach churned at the thought. He had kids of his own. Elsewhere in the terminal, Commander Rylan Mondell stepped off the aircraft at Gate 4S, instantly scanning the crowded atrium. His eyes flicked over heads, shoulders, backpacks, searching for one specific figure. The absence of his son beside the checkpoint struck him like a wrong note in a familiar song. He stopped walking. Something was off. "Jarek?" he said under his breath, though he knew the boy wouldn't hear him. He pulled out his device, still on airplane mode. He toggled it off and waited. No messages. A fresh wave of unease coiled in his gut. He turned sharply and caught a passing phrase from one of the officers' radios. "Armed suspect, boy, hallway B near service gate." Rylan didn't hesitate. He spun and strode toward the voice. "Where?" he demanded, approaching the officer mid-step. The younger man blinked. "Sir? You said armed suspect. Boy involved? Where?" The officer gestured to a hallway across the terminal. "Maintenance corridor, that way." Rylan was already moving, boots echoing with growing speed. Back in the dim hallway, Varen slammed a fist into the wall beside the door. "Everything breaks. Everything closes." His voice cracked, not just with rage, but with something deeper, fear, regret, guilt. He turned sharply and raised the knife again, this time holding it higher. Jarek flinched but held his ground. He noticed the blade waver, not from hesitation but from instability. This man wasn't in control anymore. He was unraveling. "I just needed silence," Varen muttered. "Just once, peace. But you, your eyes, they keep dragging me back." "I don't even know you," Jarek said softly, his voice controlled despite his pounding heart. "You're seeing ghosts that aren't there." Varen's lips trembled. For a second it looked like he might cry or scream. Instead, he laughed, a short, bitter sound that bounced off the walls like broken glass. He raised the knife again. At that moment, Bren rounded the corner with Officers Rendell and Kerr in tow. "Drop it!" Rendell shouted, eyes going wide. Varen spun toward them, jerking the knife forward. His other hand dragged Jarek closer, using him as a partial shield. "Don't move!" Varen shouted. "You stay back. You think I won't do it?" Jarek's pulse surged. He saw his chance slipping away as fast as it had come, but before anyone could act, a new voice cut through the tension, low, powerful, unshaken. "Let my son go." Everyone froze. Rylan Mondell stood just outside the hallway entrance, his presence so focused it bent the room's energy. His coat swayed slightly as he stepped forward, but his hands remained visible, open, deliberate. His eyes never left Varen. Varen blinked as if confused by the man's sudden arrival. "Who are you?" "I'm the father of the boy you're holding," Rylan said evenly, "and I'm not leaving without him." Varen's breathing quickened. "You think just showing up changes anything? This world doesn't give second chances. Doesn't care." "I care," Rylan said, voice steady. "Put down the knife and we'll talk. You're not thinking clearly. Don't let this moment define you forever." For the first time, Varen's grip on Jarek loosened slightly. His hand shook harder now. His mouth moved, but no sound came out. Behind him, Jarek dared to shift half a step, just enough to glance sideways. Rylan caught it. A signal. A sliver of space. He locked eyes with his son for a fraction of a second, just enough for trust to pass between them. The officers stayed back, waiting. Bren stood behind them, hands clenched tight. Jarek breathed deeply once, twice. So did Rylan. The hallway, once narrow and dark, now held the weight of fate itself, and every thread of it was pulling toward a single point. The distance between father and son was closing fast, but danger was closing faster. The attacker smirked, convinced no one would intervene, unaware that every second he held that knife brought the commander closer, a man trained to end threats with precision, speed, and authority. If you believe cruelty under privilege always folds when discipline meets fury, hit subscribe now, because justice never hesitates. Varen's arm jerked as he rammed the side of his fist against the jammed service door, teeth clenched in fury. With one hand gripping the knife, he shoved Jarek against the cold wall so hard that the boy gasped. The blade rose, higher this time, not as a threat, but as a signal that Varen was on the brink of making a fatal decision. His breathing was ragged, broken like the thoughts bouncing around his head. Jarek's pulse thundered in his ears, but his mind stayed clear. His father's voice echoed in his memory. "Fear narrows the world. Control widens it." He focused not on the knife, but on Varen's shoulders, on the uneven rise and fall of tension rippling through them. They trembled slightly. It was a small detail, but in this moment it mattered more than anything. That shake meant instability, not power. Then Varen lunged. The motion was fast, clumsy, but enough to kill. Jarek twisted his entire body to the right, scraping his arm against a jagged seam in the wall. Pain flared, but he didn't cry out. The blade slashed through empty air and struck the metal pipe behind him with a piercing clang. Sparks erupted in a burst of light, flickering wildly in the narrow hallway. For a split second, Varen recoiled, startled, not expecting the sound or the light. Jarek didn't hesitate. He bolted. "Help!" he shouted, his voice ripping through the silence as he sprinted down the hallway. Behind him, Varen roared like an animal provoked, the sound unhinged and primal. His footsteps pounded after Jarek, echoing against the walls. The knife scraped once along the wall before lifting again as Varen ran. Jarek could see the rectangular glow of the open terminal just ahead. The hallway's end was within reach. The blur of uniforms. The officers who had finally responded to Bren's alert stood at the edge of the corridor. But they hadn't drawn their stun batons. They hadn't seen enough to grasp the danger yet. Dramatic irony twisted the scene with merciless precision. Jarek was racing toward safety, but safety wasn't ready. As he burst out from the hallway, panting and wild-eyed, the officers stepped back in surprise rather than forward in protection. Their hands moved to their belts, but too late. One of them shouted, "Hey!" Jarek's voice cracked with desperation. "My name is Jarek Mondell. He has a knife." Behind him, Varen exploded into view, blade raised above his head, his face twisted with something beyond reason. The officers, still recovering from shock, hesitated again. In that frozen pause, less than a second but longer than Jarek could afford, the boy turned, prepared to dive or twist, to take whatever blow came with a sliver of control. Then a voice struck the air like a thunderclap. "Drop the knife!" It didn't come from an officer. It came from behind them all, from a presence that changed everything. Commander Rylan Mondell moved through the crowd with purposeful speed, not pushing, parting. His steps were thunder in the tiled floor, his gaze locked on the chaos unfolding before him. His eyes, cold, clear, and commanding, zeroed in on the knife, then on the man holding it. His son was 3 strides away. 3 strides and a blade. Varen's forward motion slowed. The knife still hovered, but his body stuttered with the realization that something had shifted. This was no longer just a chase through a hallway. This was now something else. The officers turned instinctively, recognizing the authority in the voice. They didn't question it. One of them stepped back, unsure if they were witnessing a father, a soldier, or both. Jarek's chest heaved with adrenaline. He didn't need to see who had spoken. He already knew. His body eased, not with safety, but with the knowledge that someone had just arrived who could make this moment end differently. Make it end right. And in that tension-soaked silence, the line between catastrophe and deliverance grew razor-thin. The father's arrival struck like a silent promise that the moment would not end the way Varen intended. Rylan stepped forward with the kind of silence that makes even chaos pause. The officers on either side instinctively parted as if responding to an unspoken command, their eyes flicking from the trembling blade in Varen's hand to the calm, unreadable expression on the commander's face. In a hallway thick with panic and fluorescent flicker, Rylan's stillness was louder than any alarm. "Step back," he said quietly, his voice low but firm, barely louder than a whisper, yet every syllable cut through the tension like a wire drawn tight. The officers obeyed, one stepping aside nervously, the other hesitating until Rylan looked at him, just once. That was enough. The boy behind him, Jarek, trembled but remained upright, his knees taut, eyes flicking between the knife and his father's back like a metronome counting survival in seconds. Varen paused. He hadn't expected this. His hands twitched, the blade glinting faintly as he adjusted his grip, not for strategy but for control. Control that was slipping faster than he realized. His voice cracked when he spoke, brittle and erratic. "Back off. I mean it. No one gets closer. I'm not going back. You hear me?" Rylan didn't blink. His hands lifted slightly, palms open, fingers loose, not in surrender, but in calm dominance. "I hear you," he said, his tone steady, nearly emotionless. "No one's taking you anywhere, Varen. But right now, you're pointing a knife at a child. That's not the fight you want." Jarek, keeping behind his father, clenched his fists to stay still. His breath hitched in shallow pulls. His mind darted through fragments of memory, his father coaching him in silent drills, telling him how even a whisper of movement can tilt an outcome. Now he understood. This was no drill. Varen's eyes darted around the hallway. The flickering lights, the officers tensed at either end, the pressure of being watched, he felt it all stacking against him. His voice cracked again. "He followed me. I saw him watching. They always send someone small first. That's how it starts." Rylan took a step closer, slowly, intentionally. "No one's following you, Varen. No one's watching. You're not under attack. You're surrounded by people who want this to end without anyone getting hurt, including you." But Rylan wasn't listening for answers. He was watching patterns. Varen's wrist trembled each time his voice rose. His weight shifted inconsistently, left foot heavy, right foot reactive. His breathing hitched in irregular bursts. That meant fatigue. That meant unpredictability. That meant opportunity. But not yet. Jarek, barely moving, caught his father's whisper. Sideways. Quiet. The boy obeyed, sliding ever so slightly along the wall. Each step was calculated, just inches, but it mattered. The angle of Varen's attention bent slightly as Rylan resumed speaking, drawing focus away from Jarek. Every word was bait, every pause a trap. "I've seen eyes like yours before, Varen," Rylan continued, gaze locked. "Eyes searching for patterns that aren't there. I know what it's like when the world gets too loud to make sense." "You don't know anything," Varen snapped, his voice nearly breaking. "You people think it's just paranoia, until it happens to you, until they strip you of everything and leave you watching shadows." "I know more than you think," Rylan said, stepping forward again. "But this isn't the way to prove anything. Drop the knife. Let the boy walk. This ends better if you let it." For a split second, Varen hesitated. His fingers loosened slightly on the hilt. But then, a distant clatter, a metal cart rolling over tile from somewhere down the terminal, made him flinch violently. The knife twitched, jerking closer to Jarek's direction. Jarek froze. Rylan's muscles tensed. His voice didn't rise, but it sharpened. "Look at me, Varen. Right here." Varen's attention snapped back. He blinked hard, shaking his head as if trying to dispel ghosts. But his focus was shattered now, and Rylan saw it. He didn't speak again. He didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already passed. Instead, Rylan leaned in by one more step, just one, and the standoff tightened into a moment where time lost all shape. Jarek stopped breathing. The officers held their stances. Even Varen, for one strange second, stopped trembling. And Rylan watched it happen. The microsecond of imbalance, the unconscious shift in Varen's shoulders that always came before a reckless lunge. He'd seen it 100 times before, in combat, in back alleys, in failed negotiations. This was the tilt. This was the moment. And Rylan stepped into it. The standoff silence felt louder than any battle Rylan had ever faced. The knife came forward, fast, wild, and unbalanced. Rylan Mondell moved with trained precision. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. The moment Varen lunged, driven by panic and delusion, the commander's body pivoted sharply to the side, redirecting the attack with a fluid motion honed from years of battlefield discipline. His right arm swept across Varen's forearm in a calculated strike, using the momentum against him. The blade snapped from the man's grip and skidded across the tile floor, spinning to a halt between the boots of a stunned officer. Varen staggered from the impact, clutching his wrist in shock. For a breathless instant, silence reigned. Then chaos answered. 2 officers lunged, grabbing Varen's arms, but he thrashed with a sudden fury, howling incoherently as if answering voices no one else could hear. His strength surged unexpectedly, powered not by reason, but by a raw, frightened madness. "They're watching! They see everything!" he screamed, voice cracking with a blend of rage and desperation. "Hold him down," one officer barked, straining to keep control. Rylan didn't assist. His focus turned instantly to Jarek, who stood frozen a few steps behind him, eyes wide, face pale. The commander stepped toward his son and placed both hands gently on his shoulders, lowering himself to eye level. "You're all right," he said softly, voice steady despite the tension still hanging in the air. "You're safe now. I'm here." Jarek gave a single, slow nod. His breathing remained uneven, but the grounding touch of his father helped anchor him, just enough to keep the panic from overwhelming him. Around them, the hall returned to motion, officers calling for restraints, a crowd forming at a distance, whispers rippling outward like static. Behind Rylan, the 2 officers finally subdued Varen, wrestling him onto his stomach and cuffing his wrists. The man thrashed once more before going still, eyes darting wildly as he muttered senseless words. That's when one of the officers noticed the folded scrap of paper jutting from the inside pocket of Varen's coat. Curious, he reached down and pulled it free. It was a letter, creased with age and sweat. The paper trembled slightly in the officer's grip as he opened it, and then froze. "Sir," the officer called out, his voice tense. "You need to see this." Rylan stood and walked over slowly, motioning for Jarek to stay behind him. The officer handed him the paper without a word. It was a letter, handwritten in sharp, narrow strokes. The contents weren't long, but the message was chilling. To VH, await instructions. The boy is marked. No witnesses. Let the illusion break. Trust the pattern. Deliver fear and clarity. AV. At the bottom was a name, Arctin Vale. Rylan's jaw tightened. The commander stared at the signature in silence for a long moment. His hands, though steady, slowly curled the letter shut. He didn't speak, not at first, but the change in his expression was clear. His eyes, once calm, now reflected a flicker of recognition. It wasn't the surprise of a stranger reading a random name. It was the reaction of a man who knew exactly what that name meant. Jarek had crept closer again, sensing something deeper had shifted. "Dad?" he asked, voice quieter than before. "Who is that? Arctin?" Rylan didn't answer right away. He glanced back at the hallway where Varen had dragged his son moments ago. The space still felt tight with unspoken danger. He folded the letter and handed it carefully to the officer beside him. "Secure that," he said. "It's not random. None of this was." "Understood," the officer replied, tucking it into an evidence pouch with a label already waiting. Jarek looked from the letter to his father. "You know him, don't you?" Rylan placed a hand gently on his son's back, leading him away from the crowd now gathering near the hallway entrance. "It's a name I hoped I'd never hear again," he said quietly. "But it's not your burden to carry, Jarek." The boy didn't press. He knew the tone in his father's voice, measured, protective, and worried all at once. But something had shifted inside Jarek too. Today wasn't just survival. It was the beginning of understanding that threats don't always appear in the form of obvious enemies. Sometimes they come wearing the face of madness, driven by motives written in shadows. Behind them, officers loaded Varen into a transport unit. The man still mumbled beneath his breath, eyes unfocused, but one word repeated like a broken incantation. "Arctin. Arctin." And Rylan heard it. He didn't show fear, but inside pieces were moving, old warnings resurfacing, old missions long buried suddenly relevant again. He didn't say it aloud, but he knew what the letter meant. He knew this wasn't an isolated incident. And as he walked alongside his son, protective and alert, he knew something larger had just awoken. Rylan realized the threat extended farther than a single attacker. With Varen finally restrained, the hallway transformed from a battleground into a tense investigation scene. The shouting had stopped, but the tension remained, suspended in the air like the last echo of a storm. Two officers held Varen down, one pinning his shoulders while the other secured the blood-flecked blade in an evidence pouch. The dim light flickered overhead, painting shadows that seemed too sharp for such a narrow space. Jarek sat on a bench just beyond the scene, elbows resting on his knees, fingers trembling but no longer frozen. His father stood beside him, a steady hand resting on his shoulder, not just for comfort, but as a silent assurance that danger had passed. Or so it seemed. "Keep your eyes on me," Rylan said quietly, crouching down beside his son. His voice was low and solid, the way a tree might speak if it could. "You're safe now. You did everything right." Jarek nodded faintly, but his eyes kept drifting to Varen. The man no longer shouted. Instead, he muttered under his breath, rocking slightly under the officer's hold like he was stuck inside a broken thought. He repeated a single phrase over and over. He said, "The time was now. The Watchers are here. Arctin knows. Arctin always knew." The name made one of the investigators pause. Did he say Arctin? Another officer, older, grizzled, pulled a crumpled paper from Varen's coat pocket. "Found this on him. It's not just a note. It's a map or something. Coordinates, dates, even a ciphered grid down the side. And that name's here too. Arctin Vale. Ring any bells?" Rylan stood slowly. A change passed through his face like a storm cloud casting a long shadow across his thoughts. He reached for the paper, his fingers careful, as though touching something that might burn. "May I see it?" he asked. The officer nodded, handing it over. As Rylan read, his jaw tightened. His eyes didn't scan it like a stranger's would. They slowed at specific phrases. Phrases like signal alignment and sequence watchers. A note at the bottom read, "Activate only under the final transmission." The implication crawled under his skin. Jarek watched him closely. "Dad, who is Arcton Vale?" Rylan didn't answer at first. He folded the letter with a calmness that looked practiced. "Someone from long ago," he finally said, voice thin and distant. "A man whose path I'd hoped never to cross again." The words carried weight, but Jarek felt the space between them. They weren't just about the past. They were warnings in disguise. Meanwhile, the janitor, Bren Lorick, stood off to the side, nervously adjusting the cap on his head as he gave his statement. His voice wavered, not from fear, but from the realization that his simple maintenance check had led him into something far larger. "I saw the signal light blinking by the cleaning panel," he explained to a staff officer, voice uneven. "Didn't think much of it at first, just figured it was another sensor glitch. But when I stepped into the hallway, there they were, the kid and the man with the knife. I didn't know what to do." "You did exactly what was needed," Rylan said firmly, turning to Bren. "You answered a quiet call. That saved a life today." Bren blinked, surprised by the commander's acknowledgement. He looked down, nodding slowly, as though still trying to absorb the truth of what had happened. Inside the hallway, the investigation continued. Officers began connecting dots: Jarek's position at the terminal, the exact timing of the attack, the letter, Varen's strange mutterings. But nothing lined up cleanly. Varen's motivations seemed unstable, almost as though he was following instructions from a reality only he could see. One of the security staff, a sharp-eyed analyst named Darren Malk, leaned toward his partner. "We need to dig into this Arcton Vale name, check psychological databases, cross-reference incident reports. If Commander Mondell reacted the way he did, there's history here." As Malk stepped out to contact Central Command, Rylan remained quiet, still holding the folded letter in his hand. He stared at the paper, but his mind was clearly somewhere else, someplace buried deeper than the hallway's tiled floor or the locked room they now kept Varen in. Jarek leaned against him slightly, the tension in his body easing but not gone. He looked up at his father and whispered, "Is it over?" Rylan looked down, then toward the officers now whispering among themselves. He wanted to say yes. He wanted to offer the simple comfort of certainty. But instead, he placed a hand over his son's and said, "You're safe. That's what matters right now." But the hallway was still too quiet, the letter too cryptic, the mutterings from Varen too deliberate. One of the investigators turned to Rylan again, puzzled. "Commander, are we sure this guy acted alone?" Rylan's eyes didn't flinch. He stared down the hallway, his voice calm but laced with a thread of unspoken dread. "No," he replied. "We're not sure of anything yet." And somewhere beyond the airport walls, a storm of questions began to gather. Jarek sat quietly, absorbing every word, every shift in his father's tone. He thought the story had ended. But now he wasn't so sure. Something larger had been set in motion, and he was part of it, whether he liked it or not. Varen, restrained and glassy-eyed, suddenly whispered again. "They said the light would flicker before it begins. Arcton watches." No one responded. The investigators continued piecing together the timeline, unaware that the true danger lay buried in the letter's cryptic message. Jarek leaned against his father, trying to process everything, unaware that a greater truth lay just beyond the surface of this moment. The incident was ending, but the story underneath it was beginning to rise. The command office had already sealed its doors by the time Commander Rylan Mondell was escorted in. The shift from public chaos to quiet interrogation happened with clinical precision, walls now lined with tactical monitors and real-time surveillance feeds. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. A worn metal chair scraped across the floor as Rylan took a seat, his expression unreadable but focused. Investigators surrounded him. 3 men, each with a notepad, a tablet, and eyes trained not just on his words but his pauses, his breaths, the weight of what he wasn't saying. One of them, Agent Dahl, leaned forward first. "Commander Mondell," he began, "before we dissect the events at the hallway, we need clarity on a name that's come up multiple times. Arcton Vale. You recognized it. We saw your face change when the letter was read." Rylan didn't deny it. His shoulders rose and fell with one measured breath. "Yes," he said plainly. "I recognized it." "Who is he?" asked another agent, Marston Rell. His tone was more direct, almost impatient, tapping the end of his pen against the edge of the table. The silence lingered long enough for tension to curl at the edges of the room. Rylan finally replied, voice steady but low. "Arcton Vale was part of a deep reconnaissance unit under the Dominion Tactical Program, a program that no longer exists on paper." That caught their attention. One of the agents shifted, jotting something down while the others leaned in. "He wasn't military?" Dal pressed. "He was a civilian operative, exceptionally intelligent, pattern analyst. They brought him in to track potential threats based on civilian movement patterns, commuter flow, terminal behaviors, social clustering. Arcton believed there were hidden signals in the data, that transit hubs like this weren't just moving people, but transmitting something." "Transmitting what?" Rell asked, arching an eyebrow. Rylan's gaze remained fixed. He never gave a clear answer, just theories. He said he saw alignments, dates, gate numbers, arrivals linked to messages, claimed they were coordinated, that someone was using public infrastructure to speak in code to observers. The room went still. Even the pen tapping ceased. "Did you believe him?" the third agent, Talver Marn, asked quietly. Rylan's jaw tightened. "No, but I believed he believed it, and that made him dangerous. When his reports were dismissed, he accused the agency of suppressing the truth. He vanished not long after." "And you think he's active again?" Dal asked. "I think," Rylan said, voice hardening slightly, "he never stopped. He just changed methods." The conversation shifted. A screen was turned toward Rylan, an audio log from Varen's confiscated phone. Static, then a distorted voice. "You'll see the boy near gate 4S. Don't let the symbols distract you. The moment is scheduled." The commander flinched slightly, the voice triggering something deeper than recognition. It was memory. "That cadence," he muttered. "That phrasing. It's him." "You're certain?" Arcton always spoke like his thoughts were puzzles. That message wasn't meant just to instruct Varen, it was part of the transmission. It was the signal. The agents exchanged looks. What they had dismissed as psychosis might now be coordinated messaging, encoded to trigger specific actions in vulnerable minds. Rylan turned somber. Varen Holdex wasn't acting alone. He was recruited, fed instructions. That boy, my son, was chosen. Marston Rell frowned. "Chosen how? Random?" "No," Rylan said with finality. "Arcton knew who I was. He's sending a message. To me." Dramatic irony thickened the air. The audience had witnessed the terror unfold, thinking it was spontaneous. Now, the threads pulled back revealed a darker pattern, a personal vendetta laced in ideology. Jarek hadn't just been a victim. He'd been used as leverage. "Commander," Agent Marn asked cautiously, "is there anything else we should know?" Rylan paused. His eyes drifted to the far wall, as if sifting through old reports buried in memory. "There was one thing Arcton said during our last mission together," he finally whispered. "When no one listens, I'll speak through those they can't ignore." I didn't understand what he meant. Now I do. The agents leaned back, silence turning heavier than before. It wasn't just about stopping a man, it was about unraveling an ideology now finding new hosts. In a room adjacent, Jarek sat quietly, sipping water, staring at a whiteboard filled with timelines. He wasn't supposed to hear anything, but a sliver of the audio had leaked through the door, enough to catch the name again. Arcton Vale. The boy's fingers tightened around the plastic cup, a question forming in his mind. Why him? Back in the command office, the conclusion was grim. The investigation was no longer about detaining Varen. It was about identifying how many others had been scheduled. Rylan knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot, and deep down, Jarek sensed it too. The deeper they looked, the more the attack revealed shadows from Rylan's past. The parking lot was quiet, but Jarek's heart was not. He walked beside his father in silence, each step echoing with the residue of what had happened. Though the terminal behind them had resumed its usual rhythm, loudspeaker announcements, suitcase wheels clattering on tile, engines idling in the distance, the boys' thoughts hadn't yet caught up. They were still in that hallway, still hearing Varen's muttering voice and seeing the flash of that blade. His feet moved forward on instinct, but his mind replayed every moment like it had been seared into his memory. Commander Rylan Mondell walked slightly ahead, scanning the path but glancing back at his son often, his expression unreadable but deeply protective. His hand brushed Jarek's shoulder briefly, grounding the boy with quiet assurance. "You did everything right, Jarek," he said softly, but with a voice that carried weight. "You stayed sharp. You stayed calm. That's more than most trained men could manage in a moment like that." Jarek nodded, but his voice didn't come immediately. When it finally did, it trembled beneath the surface. I thought he was going to—" His voice broke off. Rylan stopped walking. He turned and gently placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. The dusk behind him painted long shadows across the concrete. "Listen to me," Rylan said, his voice slow and deliberate. "Courage isn't feeling nothing. Courage is choosing to think clearly when everything else inside you is screaming. You made decisions when it mattered, and that saved your life." Jarek looked up at him, trying to believe it. He wanted to, but something still tugged at him. "The way he looked at me," Jarek whispered, "it wasn't random. He was following something. Someone." Rylan exhaled, his eyes narrowing as he glanced back toward the terminal. For a moment, his soldier's calm gave way to something older, weariness, perhaps, or memory. "There's something I didn't tell you earlier," Rylan began, his tone shifting, the weight of it pulling the air tighter around them. "That man, Arcton Vale, he wasn't just some name on a folded letter. Years ago, I was assigned to a covert task unit under Dominion Tactical. We were trained to observe, infiltrate, protect. Arcton was part of a civilian consultancy we worked with. He had ideas, brilliant ones at first, but they turned dark." Jarek listened, barely breathing. He believed he'd uncovered secret transmissions in public behavior, gestures, repeated actions, people moving like they were receiving silent instructions. He thought there were groups hiding in plain sight, watching, guiding. He started accusing the team of being manipulated, said we were ignoring signals that only he could see. I refused to validate it. I stopped replying to his briefings. "Is that why he turned on you?" Jarek asked, voice faint. Rylan nodded once. "Eventually, yes. He sent me letters, warnings, demands, then threats. But I never thought it would come back like this. Not through someone like Varen." Jarek looked at the terminal, then back at his father. "So this wasn't about me. It was about you." "It started with me," Rylan said, "but it reached you, which makes it about both of us now." They stood there a moment longer, dusk deepening into night. The soft hum of overhead lights buzzed in the stillness. Then Rylan reached out and pulled his son into a firm, long embrace. It wasn't just a hug. It was a quiet oath. Back inside the terminal, a pair of investigators entered the operations room where evidence from the incident had been compiled. Officer Karen, tall and gruff, sat behind a monitor reviewing Baron Holdex's confiscated belongings. On the screen was the unlocked interface of Varen's phone, recovered shortly after the arrest. The voice recording stood out immediately, 7 short clips, all time-stamped and sequential. Karen clicked play. Walk the southeast wall. Wait for the boy. He carries a black bag and wears gray sleeves. Do not engage until signal. Another recording. Visual confirmed. Gate 4S. Approach slow. Keep your hand near the blade. Each clip struck like a drumbeat of planning. Varen hadn't acted alone. These were instructions, methodical and precise. The final recording sealed the implication. His name is Jarek Mondell. You'll know what to do when you see him. Let silence shape the moment. The screen flashed the caller ID. The contact name matched the letter exactly. Arcton Vale. Karen's mouth tightened. He tapped a key to preserve the audio for federal review. In another corner of the room, 2 other agents exchanged glances, an unspoken recognition passing between them. This wasn't over. Not even close. Back in the parking lot, Rylan and Jarek resumed walking, their silhouettes cast long by the fading sun. The silence between them now felt less like aftermath and more like alignment, 2 minds preparing in parallel. "What happens now?" Jarek asked finally, his voice steadier. Rylan didn't answer right away. He scanned the distant tree line like a soldier expecting something more than shadows. "We prepare," he said at last. "We stay alert. We don't live in fear, but we don't pretend the world is simple either." Jarek nodded slowly. He didn't fully understand what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain. He wouldn't be facing it alone. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of digital signals and hidden messages, a name echoed again. Arcton Vale. The night closed around them, not in fear, but in quiet preparation for the battles still unseen. Minutes later, boots hit the cabin floor, the commander's presence alone freezing the entire row. The knife fell, the attacker collapsed, and the flight crew watched a silent storm of justice unfold. If you believe real authority protects with precision and ends danger instantly, subscribe now, because justice always lands first. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It highlights prejudice, abuse of authority, and the power of vigilance and strategic action in confronting wrongdoing. Its purpose is to raise awareness, inspire empathy, and encourage conversations about equality, justice, and protecting every family with dignity and respect.